Welcome to an election recap, Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing Washington's choice of a new governor, voters buying in on the mountain of advertising and questionable ballot messaging about 3 ballot initiatives, Seattleites approving the largest property tax hike the city's ever seen, and Spokane voters approving both a county and city sales tax hike. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. After more than a decade with Governor Jay Inslee at the helm, Washington voters had a choice between Attorney General Bob Ferguson and former Congressman and King County lawman David Reichert. Voters decided they prefer Ferguson over the moderate Republican. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson has covered the race for months. How'd the results shake out, Carlene?
Kind of what I think the polls suggested would happen as of Thursday morning. Bob Ferguson, current Attorney General, Governor-elect, now had a 56 to about 43.5% edge over Dave Reichert, the Republican challenger. So that lead amounts to 359,000 votes. Still a lot out there. There must have been a late surge of votes because voter turnout, even early this week, Monday, according to the Secretary of State, was way down. A whole bunch of people must have turned in ballots Monday, Tuesday. Those are still being added. 783,000 ballots still to be added in the state of Washington with approximately 5 million registered voters. So, turnout's still kind of trending below 2020, but I think it's going to get up close to it. But it's over. Yeah, Bob Ferguson, will be the next governor of the state of Washington. He's been our AG since 2013, so more than a decade. So a lot of name recognition, lots of familiarity in the headlines every day. So it was going to be an uphill battle, and it didn't end up the way Dave Reichert hoped.
Now, you say your name recognition. Ferguson obviously has been out there as the state's attorney general now for years, but Dave Reichert was no stranger. He was not completely unknown. He was a former congressman and, well-known. Probably one of the most well-known law enforcement officers in the state, connected to his work with the task force, or the team that ended up catching the Green River Killer. And to me, it's fascinating because you look at a national map of the way voter turnout, the way that states voted, even, typically blue counties in California, of all places, had much larger Republican turnout than in 2020, 2022 midterms. We didn't see that nearly anywhere in Washington.
No, absolutely not the case. And I think in the case for Reichert, and then maybe some of the ballot initiatives in Washington as well, you had the challenge going into the August primary in Washington, where the ticket was really divided. We had Mark Mullet, moderate Democrat that ran in the primary. He pulled some, Republicans to his camp. He's very, pro same-sex marriage, pro-abortion. And then you also had Semi Byrd, the far more conservative Republican candidate going into the primary. And if listeners remember, Semi Byrd got the party's endorsement right? At the state convention. Mm-hmm. That was a huge brouhaha afterwards then when Reichert won the primary. And after that, Cole, the state GOP only gave the Reichert campaign $215,000. Sounds like a lot for you and me. But
well, not compared to what the attorney general was playing around with. He had a massive war chest in his campaign coffers compared to Reichert, and even outside groups where you have, you know, in any election, there's campaign spending and then there's PAC spending that they can't coordinate by federal law, but they declare their spending and ad buys and all of that in favor of or in opposition to a candidate. And that's publicly available data. And we could see that Reichert was absolutely buried in money opposing him.
Out on his own for the most part, really. Of course, he had, you know, plenty of support and conservative groups, you know, in the state, reached as deeply into their not so deep pockets as they could to help him. But, you know, when the Republican Governors Association decided they were going to sit out the contest and that Reichert wouldn't get their support, whereas you've got the Democratic Governors Association dumping money into Washington to ensure Ferguson's victory, there was no contest. It was an uphill battle to begin with in deeply blue Washington. Reichert, I think, actually to have 43.7% or whatever it is of the overall ballot count so far as of Thursday, is a better showing than maybe a lot of conservatives thought he would even make. But a lot of people also, you know, disappointed his supporters because it seemed like because Reichert is a little bit more of a moderate, you know, Republican, a lot of people went, yeah, I can get in behind this guy. He's our best shot. And it didn't pan out. Yeah.
And you mentioned that too. He really did, you know, I'm not saying he shifted to the middle, but he's always been a moderate Republican, even from his times in Congress. He really didn't toe the party line. He was not getting, you know, A+ ratings from some of the most conservative organizations on how they rate lawmakers. And that I feel like that probably played into the support for Semi-Bird at the county or at the state level in terms of the party endorsement. But the polling really shocked me, and you made quick allusion to it, but I really want you to elaborate on that, because the most conservative polling showed Reichert really within striking distance, and those polls were kind of laughed at as you know, being one-offs. There's no way he'll garner that much support. And now that we're seeing the election tallied out, he did much better than a lot of those polls gave him credit for.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of the folks, I mean, listen, I've been called by polls people a couple of times as soon as you tell them you're a member of the media, right? It's kind of like go to do jury duty, right? They might discount you right off the bat as a biased member of the media one way or the other. But he had a lot of folks, or I should say the Republicans had a lot of folks that even right up to the very end, maybe were saying, you know what, I'm a Byrd supporter. I'm not even going to vote in the governor's contest. Or, you know, and by the way, I should point out, neither Byrd nor Mullet ended up endorsing either candidate, right? So both of them, ton of support going into the primary. Neither one of them said, please, supporters, go to this guy, go to that guy. Nobody did. So I think even in the polling, you might get people that maybe aren't as honest as they're going to be once they're filling out their ballot and they're alone in the privacy of their home going, you know what, would I rather have Bob Ferguson or would I rather have Dave Reichert, you know, and a lot of folks probably, you know, then went, okay, you know what, Byrd's not on the ticket, Mullet's not on the ticket, Reichert's my guy. Or maybe they went to Ferguson if they were more of a Mullet supporter. Very interesting. I think this actually will be, and I have reached out to the Reichert campaign, have yet to hear back. I think everybody's in, you know, kind of post-election exhaustion mode.
Sure.
But to find out, you know, would you make another run at this? Or what would you have done different? Obviously, he'd rather have the war chest that Ferguson had. That is no doubt going to be the biggest factor in this. Those ads were running, you know, 4-1, 5-1, Ferguson over Reichert. So it's going to be.
We joked earlier. There's at least a couple ads still running right now on Brett's TV. Just
do they not know?
Urging people to vote for Bob Ferguson. Along with those ads, Washington lawmakers chose to pass 3 ballot initiatives brought before them by citizen advocates for public safety and taxpayers. The other 4, which would undo some of Governor Jay Inslee's signature environmental achievements, were not acted on, setting the stage for a campaign battle that saw some of the world's richest progressives burying the measures in negative campaign ads and messaging many have said is misleading. In the end, voters appear to have only chosen one of them, despite polling from earlier showing their popularity. Washington editor Brett Davis is here to give us a post-mortem on the civic process behind these initiatives. Brett, do us a favor, turn down the TV behind you on the Bob Ferguson ads and give us the latest vote tallies on these initiatives that were on the ballot.
Wouldn't that be something? The election's over and they're still running ads.
Yeah.
That's just mean. So either
rubbing it in at this point. Yeah, right. How'd these shake out, Brett?
So on Initiative 2117 to repeal the Climate Commitment Act and do away with cap and trade, it's failing by a margin of 62% to 38%. Initiative 2109 to get rid of the capital gains tax, also failing by a margin of 63% to 37%. Initiative 2124 to make the WellCares long-term care program optional, also failing 55% to 45%. Initiative 2066 to protect natural gas as an energy choice in Washington. It's the only one that's passing. It's passing by a very small margin. It's 51-49% the last time I checked. So we'll have to wait and see on that one too.
And Brett, there's something, the one that appears to be passing. I think that there's something that we've pointed out a couple different times is the only initiative on the ballot that does not have, I forget the exact name for it. It's a fiscal impact message, right, or fiscal impact statement, that was designed, and by law is allowed to be on the ballot. And it was written by Governor-elect, right, now Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office. So people that may have seen those might have had some questions about them. First, explain what those are.
Right. So under a 2022 law, the Attorney General, and now Governor-elect Bob Ferguson, is required to draft what's called a public investment impact disclosure for the initiatives that could have a fiscal impact. In May, Republicans filed a lawsuit in Thurston County Superior Court over the so-called fiscal warning labels. And in June, a judge ruled the state officials could place information about the financial impact on voter initiatives. Last month, the Washington State Supreme Court rejected a bid brought by Washington State Republican Party Chair Jim Walsh to stop the state from doing that. They said, no, go ahead and you can do it. So those were, in fact, on the ballots. As you noted, Initiative 2066, which didn't include one of those impact notes, it's the most popular one, at least relatively so, compared to the other, 3 initiatives. So it's the only one that has a hope of passing. So it looks like it has had an impact.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. People took it literally. And, looking at this in that lens, everybody's kind of trying to dice up and understand why those were refused when initial polling and the fact that 400,000 people signed them from across the state, signed petitions to get those initiatives in front of lawmakers and then, consequentially on the ballot. Did the state simply look at this as, do you think they looked at it as a partisan issue? I mean, do the numbers say voting results in King County versus the rest of the state reflect, say, the governor's vote, or other partisan races?
So that seems to be the case. Speaking of King County, the state's most populous county, I looked at their election results earlier today, and all 3 of the ballot measures that are failing statewide are failing by an even greater margin. In King County, and I-2066 to protect natural gas, which is slightly ahead right now, it's failing in King County. So it's like, King County's against all of them by very large margins.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that just in the back of everyone's head, I wonder if that's just what they had thought about. You had the head of the Washington GOP as the sponsor for them. But, it seemed like between that and what sounded like there was some confusion about the double negative language in the back of it as well could have undermined it, because polling done by the people at Let's Go Washington, who were the driving force behind the citizen initiative, when they polled these concepts, they were incredibly popular. Right. So much so that it had progressives losing their mind over the thought that these ballot initiatives could undo years of work on these green initiatives and green Governor Jay Inslee's signature achievements. But
and then the opposition started spending millions of dollars. I think they spent about $40 million against the initiatives, and it seemed to pay off. I mean, this is anecdotally, but I must have seen a dozen at least anti-initiative commercials compared to one pro-initiative commercial. So
right. Well, PAC spending, has to be declared for or against, as we had seen, as we had referenced in the governor's race. And
right.
You look at the ratio there, and it is much more lopsided than even the results were. There was, if ads worked, they definitely did their job here in trying to give the most compelling answer to vote against these initiatives. And I wonder how many people were initially on board with supporting these and saw some of the language claiming that these would decimate and sky is falling, consequences for supporting these, and thought, okay, well, maybe I'm a little scared away by this. But yeah, we'll be picking this one apart for a long time, I feel like, but it's been an interesting ride to watch. Moving along, Seattle voters approved the largest property tax hike in city history this week. With funds going to transportation, voters overwhelmingly approved the 8-year package. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly covered the proposal. First off, how much will this measure increase property taxes for the average homeowner, Spencer?
Sure. Well, the average Seattle homeowner can expect to pay around $530 to $500 per year towards this 8-year tax. That's over $200 more than what the homeowners were paying for the expiring transportation levy that this is going to replace. So altogether, I think Seattle property owners can expect to pay over $2,000 towards the city alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now that's a gargantuan amount of money, even if you say per year instead of the full 8-year amount, which is in the billions. What is this paying for?
So yeah, basically this is funding the Seattle Department of Transportation's construction road repairs budget. The SDOT relied on the expiring levy to do most of its funding. I believe 30% of its budget came from the expiring levy. So with even more funding now available to the department, we can see Seattle tax dollars go towards road repairs, repaving sidewalks, new sidewalks, and more bike lanes, as well as traffic safety enhancements, which the city has spent so much money on towards this Project Zero initiative to have zero traffic deaths, which is failing, but yeah, maybe with more money, we'll see better results.
To have zero traffic deaths in a city of this size
ambitious.
Seems ambitious is probably the most conservative word I can think of for it. But this you mentioned before, this replaces an old tax, and there was a little bit of consternation, I would say, a little bit of hesitancy when they were originally coming up with this, because they were worried that this went a little too far, right?
You're right, but results showed over 66% of Seattle voters approved this levy, which makes me wonder, what do city officials think of this? We just had the largest tax proposal in city history that passed with an overwhelming majority. Right. Who's to say we're not, they're going to propose something in the same light for whatever else they want to fund? This is just for transportation, but we could see. I can't say public safety be something a lot of Seattleites would, approve of funding, especially towards SPD in these times. But
possibly, yeah,
there could be some other things that Seattleites will get behind and say we're willing to sacrifice our tax dollars to improve the city if that's what this comes down to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of how it goes, when they look at the results of this, and oftentimes lawmakers, city council members, they gauge whether or not they can move forward and with a new request and put it before voters based on how much appetite they feel the last couple times they've had for these. And you're right. I think that this probably bodes well for the city council in saying, well, you know what, if we need more money, we can always just put it out there. We're pretty confident that they would approve it if we give the right message for it. Now, speaking of messaging, Mayor Harrell's statement, he released that, I believe on Wednesday, I want to say?
His statement came out on Tuesday. They called a lot of city officials and opposers of this levy called it on Tuesday night because there was already an overwhelming majority of votes. Yeah. So Harrell basically on Tuesday night said, the levy will enhance the city. It's going to help with all these transportation needs, repaving the sidewalks, and making Seattle more friendly towards public transportation, whatever may have you here. But I have to assume that also Harrell has a huge sigh of relief here, because if this didn't pass, the Seattle Department of Transportation's budget would have had a huge hit to it here. Right. You would have seen a lot of funding goes towards capital projects instead, and trying to just maintain what roads we have. Right. So they were really betting on this passing, and it did.
No, yeah. I mean, and that was it. That was like we had mentioned before, it was it was a bit of a gamble, because if Seattleites said, that's too expensive, then, Harrell, who's already facing a budget crunch, if I remember correctly, as revenues drop, he would have been in quite the pickle. Absolutely. Now, speaking of property taxes, aren't they already pretty high in Seattle?
They're pretty high here, Cole. The median amount paid in property taxes by a homeowner was over $6,800 in 2022. So that's definitely way over that now, 2 years later here, especially with, in 2025, we're going to expect it to be well over $7,000. This goes towards city, King County, public schools, state, all of these kinds of taxes now. So where do we stop here? Where are property owners going to be too burdened by the costs that they have to move out? We're starting to see them. Plenty of people are getting priced out, but as we continue to see it goes, what's going to happen down the 8 years of this levy?
And looking at things, objectively, it's all about taxpayer willingness. And if I've seen in other places, like Chicagoland, for instance, where property taxes were, and still are, the biggest part of your escrow payment for your mortgage. And renters were complaining about rent being too high. And oftentimes the landlords would come back and say, well, the majority of your rent goes to property taxes. And that did lead to some belly aching there as well. And it didn't necessarily shut down property tax hike attempts, but I think what it did in the background a lot was scared off city, county, community college boards from saying, let's trot this out and see if we can get any more revenue. They saw the writing on the wall and said, we better just tighten our belts. And I wonder if that's something looking forward we'll see in Seattle, if we do start to see a little bit more fight back about high property taxes. And this definitely is going to be a bellwether for it. Thank you, Spencer. Spokane voters were given a few options, speaking of taxes, to approve a county sales tax and a city sales tax that largely address the same problems. Instead of choosing one or the other, voters decided to give the revenue to both of them. Eastern Washington reporter Tim Klauser has covered the drama by the river. Vote totals aren't finalized yet, but both appear to be well on their way to passage, right, Tim?
Yeah, Cole, the results show so far both sales taxes passing, but there's still around 30 to 40,000 ballots left to count in the coming days. Now, the county's renewal will likely pass no matter what at this time because the margin is so big at this point. But that margin for the city's sales tax increase is only around 12,000 votes. So if a lot of those remaining votes sway the other way, it could change the outcome. But even Councilmember Bingle, who's been critical of the proposal, is convinced that it's going to pass at this point. He said, if it's the will of the people, we need to give it to them.
Sure. Now, how much is this going to cost people looking to shop in Spokane?
Yeah, both of these taxes are for 1/10 of 1%, meaning they collect about $1 for every $1,000 spent with exemptions like prescription medications. Now, the county sales tax brings in around 15 to 16 million plus annually, with all that money going toward annual operations at the local jails and juvenile detention facilities. Now, the city's increase is anticipated to bring in around 7.7 million due to there being far less people within the city of Spokane than the county as a whole, with about 15% of that revenue, or about 1.1 million, going back to the county.
Now, there was a bit during the kind of the synthesis of both of these initiatives, these ballot measures, there was a bit of a clash between the county and the city over the two measures, because it was looked at by the the county saying, hey, this is our thing, right?
Yeah. People at the county were worried that only one tax would pass. And if it was the cities that passed, with the county's renewal failing, it would lead to consequences for both, as the community struggles with overcrowding and a frequent red light status at the downtown jail, which is used by other cities in the county as well as the city of Spokane. Now, the Spokane County Sheriff John Knowles and Councilmember Bingle are concerned how the passage of the city's tax will impact a future jail initiative. Now, the county asked voters to pass a 0.2% sales tax last year, which is both of these measures combined, essentially.
Right.
But the voters ultimately went against it for a variety of reasons. Now, it's considerable. Go ahead.
Well, and my question then is going to be, the one you mentioned, Bingle, and I believe it was him or Cathcart that brought this up, was the guardrails that were removed. And how do we know that the city is going to spend the sales tax on public safety when there is an obvious temptation to use it to plug that budget hole that Mayor Brown has talked about, that she says came from the previous administration, and avoid some of those layoffs and some of that belt tightening that she had announced was likely on the horizon for the next coming budget?
Yeah, and the mayor says that there are legally binding guarantees to ensure that this is used for public safety, like a sunset clause that ensures that collection will stop after 10 or so years, and a dedicated fund ensuring that it's used for public safety. But because neither of those were included in the ballot language, the city council could ultimately repeal both and put the money where they want by a majority vote at any time. Now, that hasn't happened yet, but the council's conservative minority, like you mentioned, Councilmember Bingle and Councilmember Cathcart, they're both uneasy about this possibility. Right now, the tax does fill some of the budget hole in a sense that these investments were previously funded by the general fund, where the budget is, where the budget deficit was. But now, if it had failed, the city would have had to make more cuts to balance it out anyways. But they hinted before to me that this might have been done with the remaining general fund reserves, but that's out of the question. The budget balances out with the revenue in place for the next 2 years, but there's no knowing how that funding might shift in the next biennium as the council makeup shifts with future elections.
Great. Definitely something we'll be watching. Thank you, Tim. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach. And until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.